Hello, and welcome to the Extensions Program New Teacher Support Series. Today we are going to be focusing on compliance. We're going to start by talking about the ECPPI, then we're going to move into how to create an invitation. We're going to focus on the annual review next, and then we're going to talk about reevaluation and eligibility determination. Finally, we are going to focus on the prior written notice. We are going to end our training by doing a choose your own adventure. Here you can find contact information for the Extensions Program ECCT team. Let's start by talking about the ECPPI page. This is a page that is going to be linked in this presentation. And here you can find information, all the information that you are going to need about IEP compliance. Literally everything is on this page. And like I said, it's linked in here. So this is where you're going to find the request form. So if you need to make a request, our policies and procedures, there you can see the ECATS tab there. But you're going to see, honestly, procedures for absolutely anything you can think of. Like if you have an initial referral process, go ahead and just click this tab and you're going to see it really broken out, down for you. You're going to have like forms you may need, a folder organization, everything you're going to need for that initial process. And it takes you step by step through that process. So a lot of the information that we're going to cover today, you can visit the ECPPI page and find everything you need for that here as well. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about creating an invitation to an IEP meeting. What do you do before creating the invitation to an IEP meeting? Well, before creating the invitation, you want to go ahead and verify that date with all of the required members of the IEP team. So your required members are going to be your LEA, your general education teacher, interpreter of results, and the special education teacher. So all of those people have to be present during the meeting. And you also want to verify the date with the parent or guardian. So once you guys have decided on a date and time that works for the team, you are going to move forward with creating the invitation. This invitation has to be created 7 days before the meeting. So if you are meeting, let's say, 5 days from now, you're going to have special considerations from the parent. So still need to write that invitation out for 7 days. And if the parent needs to meet before that, you can meet before that as long as all of the members of the IEP team can meet on that date. But you're going to need to write on that invitation, parent request for that new date. You have to document why you met on that different date. But other than that, outside circumstance that we just talked about, you need to have at least 7 days for the parent to respond to that invitation. First, you're going to go to the tab that says EC Process and select Invitation Documents. After that, you are going to select Invitation to IEP Team Meeting. And this is where you're going to create the invitation. You start off by addressing the letter to the parent or guardian. If there are any additional invitees, people who you're inviting to the meeting, you're going to put them on that second line there. They do have to be a part of the IEP team. So if they aren't a part of the IEP team, you can actually just go to student information and edit the team and add them to that team. If the child is 14 years of age or older during the IEP, you're going to want to check that little box right there that says your child is being invited to attend the meeting as required by state and federal statutes. So we are required to invite students who are 14 years of age or older to their IEP team meeting. Next, you see date sent. I really want to focus on this for a second because a lot of times people put the IEP date, like when you're going to have the meeting in this spot. It's not the spot for that. This is when you're sending the invitation. So if you're sending the invitation today, you're going to put today's date here. And the next section is the purpose. So the purpose of the meeting is one of these things, more than one of these things. It really depends on the type of meeting that you're going to have. So it's really important to make sure you are reading these and picking the correct options. You want to check all that apply, right? Something to keep in mind is that if you check too many things, that's okay. You can always reject those things in the prior written notice. You just want to note, like, let's say you say that you're going to talk about educational placement, and the team decides that during this meeting, we thought we were going to talk about educational placement, but we decided to ask for formal evaluations instead. It's okay to write in the rejections, we did not discuss educational placement at this time. That's okay to say why you didn't discuss it. But what's not okay is to discuss something that you didn't check on the invitation. So you want to err on the side of caution with that. The next section is going to be the meeting date. And that is where you're going to put the date that you're meeting. So you want to make sure that you're putting that for whatever date you guys have decided. Let's talk about these different purposes before we go into that, though. So, the first purpose says discuss the special education referral for an initial evaluation or reevaluation. So, if you're opening the student up for reevaluation, whether you're doing formal assessments or not, you're going to check this box. If you're doing an initial, you're also going to check this box. The next box says discuss evaluation results to determine eligibility for special education and related services. If you have already opened the student up for reevaluation and now you're meeting to discuss those results, you're going to go ahead and click this box here. You're never going to click this box alone, though, because every time you determine eligibility, you are going to always check, discuss, develop, and review or revise the IEP. So anytime you do eligibility, you are also going to click this box here because it is a requirement that we revise the IEP every time we determine eligibility. There are circumstances where you're going to click all three of these. For example, if the team has determined, not determined, but you've had a pre-discussion and said, none of us really need additional testing to continue to establish eligibility, right? So it may be that the student had new evaluations 3 years prior, and all of the evaluations are current and relevant. So you guys are just going to do a record review or suggest a record review at the meeting. And in that case, you would click all three of these because your intention is to open up for reevaluation, do a review of existing data, not ask for any formal evaluations, and then conduct an IEP meeting. So you would have all three of those checked. You would want to check this box if you're discussing educational placement. So any change in placement or adjustment to their current placement, you would click this. You would select here if you're discussing transition. And if there are any other reasons that you might be meeting, you would check this box. What I could think of for this might be ESY determination, but typically you'll go ahead and check this one for ESY determination. All right, and then you put your date in here, and that's going to be the date that you're meeting. You want to make sure that is 7 days out from the time you're creating the IEP invitation. You'll select your time, and then you're going to select your meeting place. The next section is for participants. In the participant section, you have 4 required members. So your required members are going to be your LEA representative, your special education teacher, your general education teacher, and your interpreter of results. If you are planning on excusing that general education teacher, you need to go ahead and draft an excusal. So there is a form in ECATS to excuse members of the team, and that has to be filled out by the general education teacher and then signed by the parent. You are not permitted to excuse your LEA representative, your special education teacher, or your interpreter of results. Even though that is an option for some reason in ECATS, we don't do meetings here without an LEA representative. So we don't go rogue. At most, you can go ahead and get rid of that general education teacher if you feel like you need to, or if you feel like they don't need to attend. However, if you're doing a reevaluation or an eligibility meeting, you do need to have a general education teacher present. So the only meeting that you can excuse a gen ed teacher from would be an annual review. And all of these other participants down here are optional. They don't have to attend the meeting, but they can. Just note that if you select one of these Like, let's say you select the physical therapist as someone who's attending, then that puts the physical therapist in a situation where they need to attend that meeting. Whereas if you didn't select them, they can still attend the meeting and you would just check them as other participants when you go to finalize your documentation. The other participant section, you're going to see something that says, are there any outside agencies or community organizations attending the IEP meeting? If the parent has an advocate or an ABA therapist or somebody who's coming to the meeting, that is where you're going to say yes, and you'll indicate the agency underneath by writing it in. And then once you're done, you just go ahead and I like to draft everything I make before I finalize it. So I would go ahead and draft that, check it over, and then finalize the invitation and send that home with your student. I like to send this home in the backpack, and then I like to also send it via email. That gives me 2 points of contact. And then I'll reach out to the parent with either a text message or I'll give them a call and just say, hey, just so you can keep an eye out, I sent home some documentation for you to sign. It's really important that you get this invitation signed back because that indicates that the parent is willing to attend at that date and time. And once you get that invitation back, you're going to upload it into eCats as an external document or external attachment. Now we're going to move into the annual review of the IEP. What is an annual review and what is an IEP? So, an IEP is an individualized education plan, and that is something that all of our students, especially in the extensions programs, they are going to have. The annual review is every year we are required, at least every year, to meet on that IEP, discuss it, make any revisions that we need to make, and update those IEPs where it is appropriate. You'll see that sometimes IEPs are written out for less than a year, so maybe 6 months, or maybe even as low as 6 weeks, depending on what you are discussing in the meeting. But annual review is required. So we need to meet on these IEPs at least once per year. So to start the IEP process, you're going to go to EC process drop down here, and you're going to select IEP. So before you even do that, though, there is a way here on the select a student. So if you search your students and you're going for your student by name, you're actually going to be able to see when the IEP is due. So I wanted to show you this just so you know what kind of information you're looking at here. So let's say you search for your student and you can see things like last eligibility, last IEP, IEP begin, and IEP end. So the IEP end date is when the IEP expires. It's really important to understand that you don't have to wait until that day to have the IEP. In fact, that is not good practice because you're almost certainly going to expire your IEP and fall out of compliance if you wait until the very last minute. It is very appropriate to have a meeting as early as 1 month before it is due. It is okay. There's no problem with meeting on an IEP earlier. You are collecting data to support why you're meeting. 1 month is not going to make a huge difference. But you can meet as short as maybe 2 weeks before that end date, right? You're also going to see things on this list like last eligibility. The last eligibility is going to tell you the last time they had their reevaluation done. So every 3 years we do a triennial. I can never say that word, but every 3 years we do a reevaluation. We rediscuss the eligibility for the student for special education related services. So you need to look at that date. And let's say that it says 10/5/2021. Well, that means that you are very due for eligibility and you need to go ahead and do a reevaluation for that student. But we're going to focus on the annual review first. So you're going to go into EC process and select IEP. And once you do that, you are going to see a bunch of different tabs here. The goal of this is to have every single tab with a green check mark. If you have a little red stop sign with an X through it, that means that you are missing something on that tab and it will not let you finalize the IEP. So you want to go for green check marks across the board. Let's start off with meeting purpose. So, under meeting purpose, you are going to see, well, meeting purpose. And when you click that drop down, you're going to see a couple options. So, you can either do initial, annual review, or addendum. An initial would be the very first IEP that they have with us. This would be a student who is just qualifying for services for the first time and going through that initial eligibility process. You might also use initial if you are qualifying a student who is an out of state transfer. If you are not doing either of those things, then you're most likely doing an annual review of the IEP and you would click annual review. If you're making a small change to the IEP, as maybe a small program change, something slight to the IEP that is not going to change the overall energy of the IEP, like we don't want to say addendum and then go in and change all the goals. Like that's not what addendum's for. Addendum is really for making small changes to the IEP. But if you're making a small change to the IEP, then you're going to click addendum. The important thing about the addendum is that you want to keep the end date of the IEP the same. So let's say that you are doing extended school year. You already met in November and you are not making the determination for extended school year till the end of the year. You are going to go ahead and click addendum, and then you'll make the determination for eligibility of extended school year on that page, but you're going to leave the rest of the IEP the same. And you'll also leave the end date of the IEP the same as the previous IEP. The next section is the IEP meeting date. That is simply the date that you're meeting for the IEP. Then you have the start date. The best rule of practice for me is to make sure that that start date is at least 3 days out from the meeting. So if you are meeting on the 5th of December, you're going to set that out for the 7th of December, 7th of December. And if that happens to be on a Saturday, don't set it out on a Saturday. Set it out on a Monday. Just do it on a weekday. We don't go to school on Saturday. So go ahead and just bump it to the next school day that you have, 3 days out. Take that start date. Let's say, for example, it is 9/8, 2023. You're going to do the end date for 1 year minus a day, so 364 days from the start date. So if the start date is 9/8, 2023, you are going to write the end date for 9/7, 2024. The next section is going to be where you'll find the eligibility information and the student profile. The eligibility information, now this is just a sample student, so they don't have eligibility yet, but this is where if they qualify under the category of AU or OHI or whatever it may be, you're going to see that listed there. This is also the section where you are going to write out the student overall strengths that contribute to their success in the educational environment. It is very important to make sure that this section is data driven, that it is objective, not subjective. I like to err on the side of not saying things like, Betty is a very sweet little girl. It's very subjective. Betty might be a sweet little girl, but how does that contribute to her success in the educational environment? I think it's very important to make sure that this strength section is truly honing in on strengths, right? You might be able to say that Betty's positive attitude makes her able to participate in small group activities well with others. She demonstrates excellent peer-to-peer play. Like whatever you want to say, things that you have actually seen in the classroom, but saying Betty's sweet is more of just a cushy statement. It really isn't based in fact. So try to use actual data to support this strength section. Talk about their academic strengths, but also their functional strengths. Make sure that this is a section that you spend time on because a lot of times this is the very first thing that people read on our kids' IEPs, and it starts them forming an opinion on our kids. So make sure that you take the time to write this and have it really represent your student. The next section is parent concerns. You want to fill this out at the meeting. So parent concerns, if any, for their child's academic and functional performance in school. This I mean, really, it is up to the parents, but if I have to guide them, like often I'll read this and I'll kind of just get blank stares from a parent, and that's okay because they may not be sure what you're asking them. And it's just anything they're worried about, anything they want us to focus on. I would say 9.99999 out of 10 times it's communication. It's a lot of times communication. So they're worried about them not being able to communicate their wants and needs, getting frustrated, those sorts of things. Other people not understanding their kids. Those are very common parent concerns, but might have other concerns too. So make sure that you list as many of those concerns as possible so that you can make sure that you're a united front when serving their kid. The next session is the vision for the future. I will say this is a particularly challenging section. I have never gotten anything but blank stares from parents in this section. So when I guide them, I like to guide them to pick something after school. What's your hopes and dreams for your student? And I like to say, like, what I recommend to new teachers is please don't rush parents in this because this can be a very vulnerable moment in the IEP. And it's right at the beginning where we ask them, what do you want for your kid's future? And a lot of our parents, um, can become very emotional in this section because it's a lot to think about our students in the extension program and their future. But it's very important to talk about this section because a lot of times we can help guide them in what they're looking for, right? If they say, oh, he really likes cooking, and I really want to lean into my student or my child taking cooking classes. Well, maybe some cooking classes or programs that are friendly to our students. It's something that you can start becoming a team on and really share a vision. The next section is the assessment summary section. So here you're going to find all the assessments that the student has ever had that are listed in ECATS. Right now, like I said, this is a sample student, so they don't have any assessments. But typically you'll see some speech, some cognitive, like a whole bunch of stuff. If you've just asked for a whole bunch of assessments and now you're doing the IEP that comes after eligibility, everything that you put in to determine eligibility is all going to be listed in here. You don't have to repopulate it. And this is what you're going to use when you go to the source of relevant information section. Let's do this as an example. You're going to add or remove an area. We're going to use math for an example for this IEP. I'm not going to do all of them. I'm just going to focus on math. And when you get to this section, you're going to have to expand this, and then you're going to want to add relevant or add or remove existing data. And that's when you're going to attach different pieces of data that you have in that assessment section before. So maybe you have a record review, a review of existing data, progress monitoring, an educational, things that you might use to be making determinations for math. The next section is your present levels. These are your present levels of academic and functional performance. And let's talk a little bit more about the present levels. So, when you're writing your present levels, it's very important to make sure that these are based on data. Like I said, we don't want things that are subjective in here. We don't want a lot of opinions. We really want to be using data informed decisions and data informed statements when we are creating this present level of academic performance. So for the example of math, I always make sure I have based on. So based on, let's say, progress monitoring data and classroom observations. You want to make sure that you preface what you're about to say. What is everything you are about to say based on? Is it based off of progress monitoring data? Is it based off classroom assessments? Is it based on off of formal assessments? Whatever it's based on, make sure you say what it's based on. So let's say based on informal assessments and classroom observations, student is currently able to blank. So I want you to always start with a can do statement, something that they can do, and the data that you have to prove it. So, hypothetical student can identify numbers within 10 with 80% accuracy based on 20 observable data points. He is able to, and you are not limited in the able tos. The longer that you serve a student, the more he is able tos you're going to have. So these are the can do statements. What can he do? What can he do? What can we do? And make sure that you're always putting data with that. The next section is what he's not able to do, and that's a can't do statement. So I like to call it a can do and a can't do statement. The can't do statement is not necessarily a can't forever, but a can't currently do statement. So you'll say the student is not yet able to, and then insert a statement here. What in math are they not able to do? When you're picking the can't do statement, you want to make sure that that is a statement that you are going to write their IEP goal based off of. You do not want a bunch of statements of what they can't do unless you're looking to have a bunch of IEP goals. If you have two statements of he is not yet able to, you're going to have two IEP goals. Three statements, three IEP goals. As many statements that you have that say that he's not yet able to do something, that is how many IEP goals you're going to have for that area. So in this hypothetical, we're just going to write him one goal. And in my hypothetical, I might say something like, let's say that we're focusing on comparative values. Like I said, just a hypothetical. So, student is not yet able to compare numbers within 10 as greater than, less than, or equal to. You can, shine up that statement. That was just off the cuff. So you're putting what they are not able to do. When you're creating that goal, when you're creating that not yet able to do statement, you want to make sure that it is standards based. You're writing standards based goals. If you have a fifth grader, you're not going to say that Johnny is not yet able to identify numbers 1 to 5. He might not be able to do that yet. But that is not the goal that you guys are going to be working on. That might be a skill you're working on in the classroom, but it's not going to be their IEP goal. The IEP goal needs to be standards driven. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward with the IEP. After you choose that standard that you guys are going to be working on, you want to write deficit statements. So these deficit statements or skill gap statements need to be reflective of what you just said the student cannot do. So if the student is not yet able to identify which number from a set of two is greater than equal to or less than whatever it may be, you're going to write a deficit statement that says Johnny's skill gap and his ability to identify the correct number, or let's say identify or able to solve comparative value equations. Let's say that solve comparative value equations impacts his academic ability to meet grade level expectations of the general math curriculum. That's your academic statement. If there's a functional statement, like let's say you're doing a time telling goal or something like that, that might have a functional statement. So you might say Johnny's skill gap and his ability to tell time on an analog clock impacts his functional ability to time manage in the classroom setting. Something like that. You might have functional impacts as well. The next section is your additional information. So here you're going to describe any relevant medical information. This is usually provided by mom or dad or guardian, but it can also be provided by a health assessment if you guys do a formal health evaluation or something like that. So you'll get medical information there. The next section says describe how the disability impacts involvement and progress in the general curriculum. So for every present level that you are going to have, math, reading, writing, whatever it is, functional communication, everything that's up there with a present level, you are going to have those deficit or skill gap statements. They're also called impact statements. How does it impact? You are going to want to copy. I don't usually say copy and paste, but you're going to hear me say it right here. You're going to want to copy those impact statements and paste them into this section. You can put a whole bunch of other information in this section too, but you're going to want to also have those impact statements in this section as well. And then you can write absolutely anything that you want to in this section about how their disability impacts involvement and progress in the general curriculum, but you definitely want those impact statements in this section. The next section is called the consideration of special factors page. This page is a little bit long and it's a series of questions. So you'll read through these questions and you guys are going to answer them as an IEP team. Is the student an English learner? The thing about this section is it's going to automatically populate based on Power School. So if the student is in Power School with their first language is English, and they are currently an English learner, you're going to see that this automatically says yes. If that's not the case, it's automatically going to say no. And it is not going to let you change that in ECATS unless you go and you make a data change. So if for some reason you have a student in here that says, yes, they're a language learner or an English learner, and you're like, this student is definitely not an English learner, you're going to want to get with your data manager or your school secretary and have that fixed in PowerSchool, because you're not going to be able to do it on just the ECAT side. The next section says, does the student have any special communication needs? If so, you're going to say yes. If they have speech therapy with goals or a speech pathologist, they are going to contribute to this as well. And if they do get speech, you're going to say yes. And if they have goals, you're going to check goals. It's pretty intuitive on here, but these are things that sometimes people will miss. And you're going to want to get the input of that support provider as well, the service provider, because they are going to want to contribute to the IEP. Does the student require assistive technology devices or services? If your student has had an AT eval, you're definitely going to want to get their input on this. They'll probably want to put some information in that additional information section. If they have goals in that area, then they're going to want to click these things as well. Your OT may also have goals in this section. So make sure you're collaborating with your whole IEP team on this. The next section is, does the student have a documented visual impairment, including blindness? You're going to say yes or no on that. And the next section says, does the student have a documented hearing loss? You'll answer yes or no. If they are working with the HI teacher, then they're probably going to have some goals. They'll get some services. They'll probably have communication accommodations, and then they'll most certainly have a communication plan worksheet. So once you click that, you're going to see that it populates so that you can fill out that communication plan worksheet. That is something that you are going to want to get support from your HI or possibly your speech therapist, whoever is involved in supporting you with that, your audiologist. That is not just for you to fill out. Use that as a collaborative moment to get support from your team in that area. For the student who is deaf or hard of hearing, the following have been considered. So this is an important section if you do have a student who is hard of hearing, deaf, they're receiving HI services, you want to read this section. So the student's language and communication needs have been considered. Opportunities for direct communication with peers and professional personnel in the student's language and communication mode. Academic level, full range of needs, including opportunities for direct instruction in the student's language and communication mode. All of this stuff is going to be filled out on that communication worksheet as well. So that is your consideration of that. You want to make sure that that communication worksheet is filled out. The next section says, does the student have behaviors that impede his or her learning or that of others? If the answer is yes, that is probably going to be your student who has behavior goals. You may have a BIP. If the student has a BIP and behavior goals, you most certainly need to say yes to this section and give a little bit of information in that additional information section. If the student requires adaptive physical education, you're going to say yes to this question. Is the team considering instruction on the extended content standards for the student? If this is a yes, you are going to see that the alternative assessment eligibility worksheet populates. It will not be there until you say yes. So if you have a student who is on the extended content standards, you're considering an extended content standards change in placement, you need to say yes, and then you need to review the alternate assessment eligibility worksheet. It is very important that you complete this with the parent present during the IEP team meeting. You want to read every single one of these questions. Read every single word on this page just to be safe. We do not want any question in our parents' mind that we have shared with them the full gravity of being on the extended content course of study. They need to understand that choosing this course of study for their student means that they will not be on the diploma track. They need to understand that this is a certificate track, certificate of completion. And then we also need to have a very clear understanding of what qualifies them to be in our EP program. This is a very important worksheet. Please take your time on this worksheet. Do not rush through it. You shouldn't rush through any parts of the IEP, but this is the one that you do not want to rush through. And I recommend really sitting with this and reading this ahead of time, but not answering the questions without the parent, but just so you understand the full gravity of what you're explaining to them. So you'll go through it and you will finish that worksheet. And then once you've selected yes to that, I'm going to pop back just 1 second here just so you can see. There's a section that says, are there additional parent concerns? If you say yes to this, it is meaning that you have not addressed concerns. So this section is different from the section previously where we said like parent concerns for academic and functional performance. That is where you put parent concerns. This would be saying that they have concerns and they have not been able to be addressed. You do not want to say yes to this section. Saying yes to this section means that you're probably going to have to put a pin in the meeting because the whole point of this meeting is that you're going to address all of their concerns. So it should be a no to this question because if they have any additional concerns, you want to address them in that moment. The next section says supports for academic, functional, personal changes or circumstances if applicable. So, what information is known about the student that will assist in developing an individualized education plan? Okay, so in this section, this is a catch-all. Put everything in here. How they things they like, things they dislike, things they do really well, toileting, feeding. This is a great section to put all of that catch-all information that may not have a house on the IEP. So definitely put that in here. I put things as specific as student will only eat macaroni and cheese when you heat it up and then put it in the refrigerator and let it cool down. Like there's been very, very specific things because we have very, very unique kids and they're very individualized. So if you don't have a spot on the IEP for it, this is that spot. You can put everything on the IEP. The next section says area and need especially designed instruction. So in theory, you'll have a whole bunch of spots here. You'll have math, reading, writing, you'll have APE, functional communication, OT, there's everything that you have a present level for in your IEP. You're going to have the option to select whether they do or whether they do not need specially designed instruction. They may be getting speech therapy on SAS on a supplemental model, and they might not be getting direct services with goals. So you may not say that they need specially designed instruction for functional communication. That's just an example. But in this circumstance, we're going to say yes, they do need specially designed instruction in math. This section that comes next is a secondary transition section. So once the student is 16 years of age or older during the life of the IEP. So that means if you're having it in November and they turn 16 in December, you need to go ahead and do this section because they're going to be 16 during the life of the IEP. This section is pretty intuitive, but you're going to want to do this as a team. You're going to select who is giving information about student needs, preferences, and interests for the course of study. So this can be, if you're doing like, for example, a survey, that would be the student is giving feedback. If parents are maybe taking a survey as well, or guardians, family members, you're going to click parents. The adult service agency representative, if they have an advocate or somebody from the community who's supporting them in making these decisions, like let's say they're a part of a day program on the weekends and they've been working on cooking, that would be an adult service agency representative, and you would go ahead and click that as well because it's contributing to the creation of the secondary transition plan. School staff, so yes, in our case, if you're listening to this, you are school staff and you're contributing to this plan as well, so you'll go ahead and click yes to that. You want to make sure that you indicate their course of study. F is for future ready core course of study. So that's leading to an NC diploma. In extensions, you're not going to click this one. This is leading to an NC diploma. So that's not our extensions, kiddos. The O would be the occupational course of study, still leading toward the NC diploma. For our extension students, that's the extended content standards leading to a graduation certificate. So it's important to indicate which one of those your student would qualify under. And then you just work through those post-secondary goals and support, and it's like a little mini IEP inside of your IEP. It's going to be very functional. There are academic skills built into it, but it's very functional and very future oriented. So you want to make sure that you are completing this for your older students. All right, next we're going to talk about annual goals. And here, when you go to the annual goals page, you're going to see that present levels of academic performance. They are going to be in there. So you have something to reference back to when you're doing your goals. Because, like I said, your goal is going to be based off of those deficit or the can't yet do statements. All right, so you're going to click on add delete goals, and then you're going to select add goals. Let's talk about what kind of goals you're going to be adding, right? So when you are creating your goal, you want to be using SMART criteria. And that means that the goals need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Any goal that we're writing into the IEP should be a SMART goal. Even when you're creating a behavior goal or an academic goal, it doesn't matter. They all need to be SMART. And for our goals that are academic, they need to be standards based. And this will be linked into your presentation as well. So if you click on this, it's going to bring you to the extended content standards page. And you're just going to go ahead and go down to extended content. Here we go. Extended content standards. And we're talking about math. So let's do a hypothetical, like a fourth grader. All right, so if you are writing a hypothetical goal, let's say for a fourth grader, and you have this extended content standard of solve one-step word problems using addition or subtraction within 20. Here is what we mean by standards-driven goals. I understand what you might be thinking, right? So you're thinking about a specific student and you're like, there is no universe where we're even close to that. And that's okay because that's why we're here, right? We're working with these students where they're at and we're trying to get them to meet as close as we can to these expectations. But we know that all of our students are on different levels. So you may have a student who is not identifying numbers in print, let alone adding and subtracting within 20. So maybe that's not the goal for you. Or maybe you can adapt this goal. You can change this goal to be standards driven, but not like necessarily word for word of this standard, right? So you want it to be achievable. Let's say this student is still working on adding and subtracting within 10. You can change this to be adding and subtracting within 10. That is where they're at. You're meeting them where they're at. Let's say that the student is still struggling to identify addition and subtraction symbols. Like, let's say that's where we are, right? It is still standards driven. It is standards derivative. If you say, perhaps the student will identify the appropriate symbol to create an equation. So let's say you have like 1 blank 1 equals 2, and they have to decide what symbol goes in that space to make the sentence true. That is a very adapted version, a very simplified version, but it's still standards driven. It's driving them toward this overall skill of being able to add and subtract within 20. So that's just an example of how you have to be flexible and you have to think outside the box and think about your students for who they are as individuals. Don't get so bogged down on what your students can't do. Focus on what they can do and then kick it up a notch. If you know that they can identify numbers 1 to 5, let's kick that up a notch and let's find a way to make it fit within this standard. That's what we do. We're adaptive. So that's just an example. There's a bunch of different examples. If you ever need support on writing these goals, this is a great thing to ask your mentor for or your EC chairperson. They are going to have experience with this. They've been doing this for years and they understand how tricky it is to kind of work around and make sure that we're making these goals perfect for our kids. But they do have to be standards based. We want them to be measurable, very specific, like we were talking about. Measurable is important as well. You want to make sure that when you have a goal, it It has a point of measure. We can't just say, Johnny will attend to math activities with 80% accuracy. It's ridiculous, but I see it all the time. You can't attend to all math goals or math activities with 80% accuracy. How are you going to record that data? How are you going to monitor that? And then what does it mean to attend to math activities? That's so broad, it's not specific at all. So we want to make sure that we're making truly specific and measurable goals. They have to be achievable, like we were talking about before. Even though they're standards based, they need to be achievable and they need to be relevant to the student. They also need to be time bound. So naturally, our IEB goals are time bound because we do an annual review every year, but there's other ways to look at time bound. So if you look at this goal that I have an example over here, over 3 consecutive data collections, that is also a way to bind a goal by time in that it is asking that he does this over 3 data collections. So not just once. We can't just say, oh, well, he sat down today on a Tuesday and he did this with 75% accuracy. So goal met, we're never going to do maintenance. No, like I like to put in those consecutive data collections because I want to see him do it at least 3 times before I can say with confidence that he's met that goal. So here's an example of a SMART goal on the side here. Given the use of adaptive materials and assistive technology, student will select from a field of 3 visual choices to identify the solution to an addition problem with sums no greater than 20 with 75% accuracy over 3 consecutive data collections. So I took that goal and I put it right here. And it's a very appropriate goal for this student. But like I said before, if you have this goal, you're going to want to make sure that this is your impact statement. So what that might sound like is student is not yet able to select from a field of 3 visual choices to identify the solution to an addition problem with sums no greater than 20. And then I might say student's skill gap in his ability to solve addition problems within 20 impacts his academic ability to meet grade level expectations in the general math curriculum. Student's skill gap in his ability to, well, I don't know how you make that functional, but I don't know, maybe count out his goldfish. I'm not entirely sure how you make that functional. You don't have to always have functional. So this would just be more of an academic goal. Once you've created that goal, you want to come over here to where it says goal details and objectives. You're going to list if it's a transition goal or not. For the student, it is not. He is not in transition. You're going to want to select if it uses assistive technology. I indicated in here that it does, so that's a yes. How are you going to monitor progress? You are going to use data sheets to do that. And you're going to use those data sheets. There's other things you can use. You can use so you can use data sheets. We're going to start over on that. The next section is assistive technology, and you can see that I actually indicated that in the goal right here, so it is a yes to that. The next section is the method of progress monitoring. So I've indicated data sheets for this, but you can go ahead and drop down that drop down box there and you can select however you want to monitor progress on this goal. You want to have at least one way of monitoring progress. You can have multiple ways, but just keep in mind that if you say something like work samples, you do have to provide those work samples. So if it is something that calls for work samples, great. Maybe writing might be an example of that. But if it isn't, then you don't have to say work samples. Don't just say something to say it, right? Make sure that you're going to follow through with how you're going to progress monitor this goal. For me, I said 75% was my mastery criteria here, and whatever percentage you put in your goal, you're going to go ahead and match that in your mastery criteria. And then next, you're going to select add objectives. You're going to want at least 2 objectives for every goal. And there's a couple of things that you can do with your objectives. You can either increase in mastery or you can change the skill. You can increase in skill difficulty. So let me give you some examples of that. This is an example of it increasing in mastery. So we have given the use of adaptive materials, blah, 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 blah. So no greater than 20 with 55% accuracy over 3 consecutive data collection. So that's objective 1. Objective 2, I have 65% accuracy. And then the overall goal is 75% accuracy. So what this is saying is that in order to meet objective number 1, 55% accuracy, objective 2, 65% accuracy, and overall goal 75% accuracy. That is one way to add objectives. Another way to add objectives is to leave the accuracy the same, but change the skill. So in this example, I changed it to addition problems with sums no greater than 10 with 75% accuracy. That would be the first objective. For the second objective, I have addition problems with sums no greater than 15 with 75% accuracy, and then overall is 20 with 75% accuracy. So you can either increase the difficulty of the skill or increase the mastery, but you cannot do both. You can't have the mastery changing and the skill changing the mastery. That is going to be impossible to monitor, and just don't do that. And once you're done with that, you're going to go ahead and edit the details. So you'll save those and continue, but you want to make sure you edit the details because this is where you add the method of progress monitoring. So if your data sheets is how you're monitoring progress on the overall goal, make it the same on your objectives. So go into the details for each of those and do that. The next section is the services. So I'm sorry, you're going to click add special education services. So if you have a student who already has an annual review, they've had services, this is already going to have things in it, right? But if you have an initial, had a state transfer, that sort of thing, and this is the first time they're having an IEP with us, this is going to be empty and you're going to have to add special ed services. You're going to select 4 at a time, but you're going to select these for every special education service that they have. So everything that we do for them during the school day, everywhere where they are served, you're going to want to go ahead and select an area for that. And this is where you're going to indicate the specially designed instruction time. So if you said math, how many minutes of math per day? 60 minutes once per day. Where are they going to get this? Special education. The duration is going to be the IEP start date to the IEP end date. And you're going to want to do this across the board. Now, if you look down at the bottom, you see daily living, independent living skills. That represents lunch. They're getting that 30 minutes once per day. But in my hypothetical, they're doing this with their general education peers. So I'm going to indicate as location general education because they're with their gen ed peers to do this. For social emotional learning skills, that for me in this hypothetical represents recess. So 30 minutes once per day with their general education peers. Now, if your student is not doing this with gen ed, then don't put gen ed. If they do lunch as a group in the classroom, or if they do recess together with none of their gen ed peers, you're going to put special education. Make sure that this indicates their day. Like this needs to be a representation of how your students are spending their day. The next section in this area is going to be additional service information. So here's where you're going to find that transportation as a related service. If your student is receiving transportation as a related service, you're going to indicate that here. And then in the next section, you are going to give specifics on how they're receiving that transportation as a related service. So whether it be an address stop, this is where you're going to put information about a lift vehicle or a child safety restraint system. Everything is going to be in that describe special transportation services section. The next section is if the student will be removed from non-disabled peers for any part of the day, explain why the services cannot be delivered with non-disabled peers with the use of supplemental aids and services. We could do an entire class just on this. This is called the LRE statement, the least restrictive environment statement. You are taking this student away from time with their general education peers. Why? You have to tell them why. This is the section where you explain why. They require a small student to staff ratio for student safety in order to access their educational environment, blah, blah, blah. There's a million things you could put in here. You will see LRE statements written all different ways, but they have the same goal in mind, which is we need to explain why we are removing students from time with their non-disabled peers. I would recommend getting with a veteran teacher, with your compliance facilitator, maybe looking at some of your previous IEPs to see how this area was worded. This is something that you will definitely need feedback on because it's very specific. We want a lot of things in this section, and like I said, it could be a training on its own. So definitely get outside support with this. Writing this LRE statement, it's very important. The next section is progress reports on the IEP goals. So this is going to be given with the report card schedule, right? So that is typical. You're going to give it with the report card schedule at 4 times a year. If they require more frequent progress reports, then you would indicate that here. But I would say, like, typically you're going to be checking a more frequent progress report is not needed at this time. And the next sections are for preschool students. And then the section after that is describing any consultative support. So this section would be filled out by your service providers, or you might indicate here that the student requires tube feeding and the support from a professional who's been trained in order to deliver the tube feeding, like that sort of thing is going to go in here. They might have a catheter. You would want to indicate that stuff here. Anything that requires consultation or training for the school staff to meet unique needs. The next section is service goal integration. You just want to make sure that the services supporting the goal is indicated here. So in math, you're going to say edit goal integration, and you're going to select when it's going to be served, and it's during math. So that seems like common sense, but you never know. Some people just skip by this page because it's not going to give you a red stop sign if you haven't done it. So make sure that you integrate those goals and indicate when they're going to be served. The next section is accommodations. So this is where you're going to put classroom activities and you're going to add any accommodations that they might need. So you'll click add class activity. And like I said, if you have a student with an established IEP, most of these are already going to be in there, but make sure you're actually checking them and that they reflect the student's day. I just went ahead and checked all of them because my kid doesn't have any, my hypothetical kid. And then you're going to want to add if there's any accommodation. So if your student uses assistive technology in the form of, let's say they're using PECs, so they require the use of basic a picture response system to indicate their wants and needs or bathrooming or like that sort of thing. They have a PEC keychain or something like that. That's something that you want them to have everywhere. It shouldn't just be, well, when I'm in Miss Bo's class, I'm going to have access to communication, but everywhere else I go in the school environment, I'm not going to be able to tell people when I'm mad or when I have to go to the bathroom. Like that is unrealistic. So we want to make sure that we're specifying that on their IEP. If they're using assistive technology in the form of a communication tablet, a high-tech communication, or if they're using picture symbols to communicate, we want to make sure that they have that everywhere. So I go ahead and click that across the board. I'll put in art, music, assemblies, PE, literally everywhere. But if they require something like testing in a separate room, you also want to indicate that, like in their math section or testing in multiple sessions. You want to make sure that you're indicating those accommodations in this section. And then see where it says add implementation specifics. That is where you're going to actually specify what you mean by it. So in this one, I just used student requires the use of total communication approach throughout the educational environment, the required access to AAC for the means of communication. So that's just like a generic statement. And I put that in there, and I will put that in there honestly for every kid across the board because I want them to make sure that they have access to communication in the total school environment. The next section is alternate assessment. So if the child is participating in alternate assessments, explain why, the regular ed testing program, blah, blah, blah. So you can read it. So pretty much what this is saying is why are they doing extended content testing. We do extend one testing. And what I will say here is that the student is participating in the extend one for reading and extend one for math because they have been participating in instruction that follows the extended content standard courses study. So the extend one testing and assessments is the best reflection of their abilities and knowledge gained in the school year. Something like that. Something that says the reason we're doing extend one testing is because they're being taught on extend one. That's just an example. All right. There's an example right there. Student is receiving instruction on extended content standard course of study. Therefore, the NC Extend 1 and NC Extend 1 reading and math are the most accurate representation of their understanding of academic concepts. I like that one too. Less off the cuff too. So that's what you put there. The next section is classroom activities. So you would want to add any classroom activities that aren't listed here, but I've gone ahead and added all of them. And here's where you want to say the location. So we have the accommodations in there. We added that assistive tech and everything. If they are doing art with gen ed, click gen ed. If they are doing it only with special ed, just your class, go ahead and click special ed. If once a month they do it with their general ed peers, but then, the other 3 times a month they're with special ed, go ahead and put both. If assemblies are sometimes gen ed, like blended in, but sometimes you have your own special extensions assemblies, click both. Same thing with lunch, like let's say like once a month you guys stay in the classroom and it's a special time for just you guys to eat lunch. Okay, just understand it's fluid, but make sure it represents what you're doing. Because at the end of the day, if someone comes to you and says on their IEP, it says that they are getting art and music with their general ed peers, but you have been going with special ed peers for the past 6 months, that's not going to look good because you want to be following their IEP. All right, and the next section is the extended school year section. So the ESY services, if you are having this meeting before winter break, you cannot make this determination. I can't think of a situation where you'd be making this determination before winter break. So you would want to say cannot be determined at this time if you guys are considering ESY. Let's say that your student had extended school year the summer before and their parents are like, oh, they always get extended school year. Okay, we consider it every single year then. We're considering it, we're going to collect the data on it, but we don't make the determination till the end of the year. So if you know that the student is up for consideration for extended school year, it's something that you want to consider, say cannot be determined at this time. You'll make that determination at the end of the year and you guys will set a date to meet at the end of the year. If their parents are not interested in all, they do not want extended school year, they did it a couple years ago, they didn't like it, doesn't matter what it is. This is really an IEP team decision. And if the parents don't want it, then they don't want it. We're not going to make them come to school over the summer. So you just go ahead and indicate no. If they're not interested, just say no. If it doesn't seem like it's a good fit for them, just say no. But the only time you're going to say yes is if you have that outside LEA support where they're helping you make the determination of ESY eligibility. We have a whole documentation that we fill out, we review, make sure that they are a candidate for extended school year, and then we will give you the go ahead on determining yes for that. And that ESY eligibility, that little drop down is going to say yes, no, it cannot be determined. And then you're going to go ahead and if it can't be determined at the time, you're going to decide when you're going to meet by. And then that's it for the annual review. So you go ahead and say the date that the IEP is sent. You make sure all of your folks are filled out here. And then if you excuse the general education teacher, you're just going to click excused underneath the general education teacher and make sure you've filled out that documentation for the excusal. So now we're going to talk about reevaluation and eligibility. Let's start off with reevaluation. When you are going to conduct a reevaluation, you go to EC process and you select reevaluation. And this is what you're going to see under the reevaluation tab. So we go to reevaluation, and then you're going to start by clicking assessment summary. Now, under the assessment summary, if you have any assessments that have been done for the student, they are going to go here. Let's say you have a hearing, a vision, a psychological, a speech, whatever it may be, you're going to add those assessments in here. If you're doing an initial or out of state transfer, you might not have anything in this section. However, if you do, this is where you're going to add it. And typically, if you're not an initial or out of state transfer, you're going to see a whole bunch of assessments that help make a determination in the past, or if they've had any special education support, it's just going to be in here. These things don't disappear. And if you do need to add an assessment, you just go to add assessment. So you click on add assessment, and then you'll select the type of assessment. You're going to do the assessment area, and then you'll put some information over here about the student's evaluation. The next section of the reevaluation page is just a review of all these records. So you start off with a record review, you go into attendance, past and current grades, work samples, results of local and state assessment data. You're going to add existing data using that little tab on the side, so any of those evaluations that you had previously. But if there's no information for that area, there's going to be a little button that you click that just says no information at this time. So you'll just go ahead and click if there's no information at this time. You want to put everything you possibly can into this document, but if you don't have it yet, you don't have it yet. If you're doing initial for an out-of-state transfer, you might not have attendance or current grades or information from local state assessments. Like that may not be something that you have yet. It's something that you'll get over time. But if you are doing a reevaluation on a student who you have had, then you want to go ahead and get that attendance information off PowerSchool, get the past and current grades and work samples off of PowerSchool. Like get that stuff and add that in here. Same thing with the local and state assessments. You want to include all that information. The summary section is going to be any information provided by the parent. So you'll expand that. And if there's any information like outside assessments or evaluations, you can add that in here. And if there's classroom-based assessments, so this is where I usually like to put ULS data, pre and post data from the classroom. And then I'll also put in some progress monitoring data in here as well. This section is the observation that is most recently done. If you want to add additional ones, you can always say add additional observation, but I like to go into previous eligibility and I like to add an observation in here from that. And if there's any additional observation data, you can put that in here as well. In this section, if there's any additional information that you want to add to the reevaluation document, you'll add it in here. And if there isn't, you just say no data available at this time. And if you filled out all these components, it will let you go to the reevaluation decision page. The reevaluation decision page is going to give you two options. The first one is the IEP team has determined that no additional formal evaluations are needed. The second option is the IEP team has decided that formal evaluations are needed to determine, and then it's going to give you what you're determining. So if you don't think that you need formal evaluations, let's say you're doing a reevaluation, it's been 3 years since he had his previous assessments done, but you don't need to make any program changes, and you don't suspect that there are any changes that have been significant enough that you need to ask for more data to make the determination of eligibility, right? So the team has conducted a review of existing data, and the team has determined that existing data is current and relevant. Existing data will be used to determine continued eligibility for special education related services. That is acceptable. Let's say that you guys do want to do formal evaluations, and you're going to click the next button that says the team has decided that formal evaluations are needed to determine, and then you're going to fill out the rest of the eligibility or the reevaluation document. So if you need formal evaluations to determine eligibility, know that if you select yes to any of these, you're going to have to complete the eligibility determination document. And we're going to go over that next. But if you say yes to if the student continues to have an existing disability, you're going to have to fill out eligibility. If you say yes, if the student has a different disability area suspected, eligibility. If you say if the student continues to need special education related services, that would be an eligibility determination. So any of these being a yes, you're going to have to fill out eligibility. This would be, for example, if a student had a different disability area, if you're looking for a change, like let's say that they have been qualifying under DD, developmental delay, and they're coming of school age, like they're turning 8 and they need to have a school age category. So that would be if the student has a different disability area. You're going from DD to possibly AU or OHI or HI or, whatever it may be. ID moderate, mild, it doesn't matter what it is. Any change in category, you would be doing an eligibility determination. If you say no to all three of those, and that is not why you're asking for formal assessments, and you actually just want to make a programming change, you don't have to do eligibility. So you can say no to all the eligibility options. And perhaps you're asking for formal evaluations to make a change to present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, or you're doing it um, to decide whether any additions or modifications to special education or related services are needed to meet measurable annual goals and participation in the general curriculum. If you just do a program change, know this. If you just do a program change, it's not going to reset the clock for that 3 years, right? If you're doing eligibility, every 3 years, you need to do eligibility. So you are probably doing it to the third one. Let's say this. If it's every 3 years, you're doing a reevaluation, you're going to want to say yes to if the student continues to need special education related services. Related services would be speech, OT, PT. You might be doing an assessment to see if we want to take away speech, like maybe they don't need it anymore, or add more speech. Maybe they need more speech. If you're making a change to related services, that is when you are going to be determining eligibility. Every 3 years, we reassess whether students are eligible for special education and related services or in what way they're eligible. So it would be a yes to this if you are doing their 3 year reevaluation and eligibility. If you're asking for formal assessments, these are the lists of all the formal assessments that you can ask for, all the evaluations that you could possibly need. But how do you know which ones you need? Let's say that you are going from a DD category and you're suspecting AU, but what evaluations do you ask for to determine that the qualifying category is AU? Well, we have checklists for that. So you're going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this. It's going to bring you to the document here. You are going to access the CMS eligibility checklist. And let's say you're specifically looking at AU and maybe ID. If this is their category change, you're going to want to look at probably more than one because you might have more than one suspicion, right? Now, if they came from out of state and they have qualified under AU for the past 11 years of their life, then you can just look into AU. It is reasonable to just suspect AU. But if you are looking for more than one, you're going to want to make sure that you have the evaluations appropriate for more than one. So you would want to make sure that you go through and you're asking for a hearing screening, vision screening, motor screening, observations. You want to click that summary of conference, social developmental history, educational. So, I mean, like when it's AU, it's pretty much everything. But you want the adaptive behavior evaluation, educational, psychological with cognitive, sensory processing, speech, and a behavioral assessment, an autism rating scale. So you're going to want all those things. So that means that when you go to that checklist, oops, sorry. When you go to that checklist on ECATS, you are going to make sure you click all those things. If you're asking for possible AU and ID, then you're going to want to make sure you have all the ones that are necessary for ID and AU. And then some specifics down here. So you're always going to want to ask for a health screening, and the health screening is for that vision and hearing screening. You want to specifically click those both because we need those in order to move forward with formal assessments. You can't move forward with the formal assessments unless you have screened the students for vision and hearing and they have passed. And then with the psychological, you're going to want to make sure you check what you're specifically looking for. We usually want that cognitive and the social emotional measures, but I like to put that psychological evaluation and then the evaluation including intellectual evaluation. And then once you finish that, you are going to go ahead and close this meeting. You're going to close this documentation. So the purpose of this meeting is the reevaluation report. You're going to put the date and all of the participating members, and then you're going to draft and finalize that document. That is that reevaluation document. So let's say that you asked for formal evaluations. This is the first step then in the whole process that is reevaluation and determining eligibility. So let's say your student is up for their 3-year reevaluation that's due. And so you open them and you wanted an up-to-date cognitive, and you also wanted an APE eval because you didn't he didn't have that on his last IEP, and we want to go ahead and add that because he needs adaptive PE, we suspect. So you're going to need consent. You asked for these evaluations, and now you need to ask for consent to evaluate. So you go to EC process, click consent, go to consent to evaluate, and click create consent to evaluate. You're going to address it to the parents. You're going to put the meeting purpose, which is going to be that reevaluation, and then the copy or the date it was sent. And then when you finalize that, you're going to see that it's going to have a list of all the evaluations that you asked for. You need to get that signed. You need to have it returned by the parent, and then you need to upload it under the consent to evaluate. And that will populate to allow you to upload as soon as you finalize that document. All right, so in our hypothetical, you asked for formal evaluations. You asked for consent. You finished your hearing and vision. You finished all the formal evaluations that came after that, and they're all ready to go. And you're ready to hold the meeting for eligibility determination. You have everything you need. You're going to want to make sure you have that LEA. You're going to want to make sure that you have that general education teacher who can stay for the whole meeting. And then you're going to want to make sure that you have the parent with the best date. You're on a date from the parent, and then you want to send that invitation full circle back where we started. You want to send that invitation to the IEP meeting, and this one is going to be an eligibility determination, and you're going to be making edits to the IEP document. So you want to make sure that you're clicking both of those. Under EC process, you're going to select eligibility, and that is going to bring you to the eligibility determination page. You start off with the meeting purpose and suspected disability. That meeting purpose, it can either be initial eligibility or reevaluation. Initial if you're doing an out-of-state transfer or a first-time student who's receiving services, or reevaluation if you're just doing, like I said, that 3-year reevaluation. And then you are going to click a suspected disability. You can add areas. You can suspect all the disabilities. You shouldn't. It's ineffective and it really doesn't make any sense. But you might be looking into AU. You might be looking into hearing impairment, a visual impairment. You might be looking into an orthopedic impairment. We have really complex kids out here. So you may have a very complex case where you're asking for all these things. Just know that every single area of suspected disability is going to come with a worksheet, so get ready for that. But it's important for us to have a full picture of the student. So you can select from any of these, and you can select as many as you need to select, as many as you were considering when you open them for reevaluation. And the next section is the assessment summary. So once you have all the assessments in ECATS, everything that you've done, the health screening, the vision screening, the the autism rating scale, the adaptive, the cognitive, the psychological report that includes that cognitive, I guess, the APE eval, whatever it is, everything is going to be in here. And that's important because then you're going to move into the next section, the summary of required screenings and evaluations, and you are going to attach all of those assessments to the areas of assessment, the assessment areas. So if you have an educational, you're going to attach that in educational. Here's the tricky thing. If you selected AU on the first page as a suspected area of disability, and then you don't have an autism rating scale to attach to that behavioral section that's required for AU for the category, then it will not let you move forward. So it's going to check and balance you to make sure that you have all the assessments that you need to make the eligibility determination. And then you're going to want to put your vision screening information here, your hearing screening information here. You'll often see that audiology or VI will actually upload their vision test or their assessment if it's like more complex. Like let's say that the student is VI, but we needed a functional or it's not functional behavior. We need a functional vision, then they're going to have theirs uploaded as an assessment, and you're going to need to attach that below. So this section is definitely a compilation of all of your assessments that you have done. And then you're going to move on to the eligibility worksheets. All right, so here we are at the worksheets. When you have a worksheet, it is always going to start with the strengths and needs. Put that information in here. As a result of the required screenings, evaluations, progress monitoring data, and a review of existing information, what do we know about the student? Put the strengths and the needs in here. And then every area where you suspected disability is going to populate a worksheet for you to fill out. There is an AU worksheet, deafness worksheet, MU worksheet. These are just examples that I put in here that's selected, but you will have a bunch. If you clicked a bunch, let's say you picked 5, you're going to have 5 different worksheets up here to fill out. ID mile or intellectual disability is going to have its own worksheet. Orthopedic impairment, anything that you select is going to have its own worksheet, and you are going to have to fill out each and every one of those worksheets for consideration. And in the meeting, you are going to want to review every single one of those worksheets for consideration. So any suspected area of disability, you are going to want to review that worksheet. After you review the worksheet, you're going to move on to the eligibility determination. The IEP team has reviewed all the required screening and evaluation information and discussed the student's strengths and needs. The eligibility report includes the following. You want to make sure that you are selecting information from a review of existing data, information from assessments and other sources, and eligibility worksheets for each of the suspected disability areas. You only select this one, the additional information required to determine SLD, if you're considering SLD. The next section is going to be the determination itself. So disability determination, based on the information from a variety of sources that have been documented and are fully considered, the IEP team has determined, and you pick one of the two, either blank, that's a person, student, the criteria for one or more of the 14 disabling conditions described in the NC policies governing service for children with disabilities. You're either saying that they do qualify, they meet the criteria, and then you select the area where they meet the criteria. Or you're selecting that they do not meet the criteria for one or more of the 14 disabling conditions described in the NC policies governing services for children with disabilities. If they don't meet the criteria, you're going to finalize and you're pretty much done there. If they do meet the criteria, then you are going to have to answer the adverse effect on educational performance section. So the team has also determined that the student's current educational performance is not primarily caused by. Now, this is really important to focus on. I just want to stress it, stress it, stress it. These are like double negatives. You're saying, yes, that it is not caused primarily by insert here. So You want to make sure that you get verbal confirmation from the team that they agree that the current educational performance is not primarily caused by a lack of appropriate instruction in reading, a lack of appropriate instruction in math, a limited English proficiency, or the disability has an adverse effect on educational performance. Next, you want to indicate the instructional requirement. So the IEP team has determined that the student requires specially designed instruction and related services. You want to say yes. And next is the eligibility determination. So, in order to be eligible for special education related services, the student must meet the criteria for for a disability in Section 1, have a disability that has an adverse effect on educational performance documented in Section 2, and required specially designed instruction related services in Section 3. You're going to say yes that they meet all those criteria, and then you're good to go. So you're going to go ahead and finish this documentation. I like to get verification from the team members a couple of times during this process. Like if we are in agreement, let's go ahead and move forward with finalizing this documentation. Can I get verbal confirmation that the team is ready to move forward? Like whatever you need to do, I like to get additional confirmation before I finalize the eligibility determination. What do you do when you're done with the eligibility determination? You go and you do a new IEP. Anytime you determine eligibility, you need to do a new IEP. Anytime you determine eligibility, you need to do a new IEP. So you'll go into IEP and you'll complete a new IEP. That doesn't mean that you have to change everything on the IEP, but it does mean that you need to create a new IEP with a new start date and a new end date. And you want to include that in your prior written notice. If this is the student's first time receiving services, like let's say they're an out of state transfer, or if they are initial, you are going to want to get consent for services. We need consent for services documented for all of our students who are receiving special education services. So you'll go to consent for services, and you will complete that consent for services documentation. Once they have completed this, or once they've signed this, return this, you are going to upload it into the consent for services section under consent. All right, let's talk about completing the prior written notice. When do I complete the prior written notice? You are going to complete the prior written notice in the IEP meeting. And you are going to do it when you are finished, when you've concluded the meeting, whatever it may be. Your reevaluation is going to have its own prior written notice. When you determine eligibility and you do an IEP in that meeting, it's going to have its own prior written notice. The prior written notice is for the meeting, not necessarily an individual process. You don't need two prior written notices if you do two different things in a meeting. You just need one. But you do need a prior written notice every time you meet as an IEP team. If you start a meeting and you have to pause the meeting, you write in the prior written notice everything you've done, and then you say that you had to pause the meeting. But when you do the second part of the meeting, that's a new prior written notice. In order to write the prior written notice, you're going to go to EC Process and select Prior Written Notice. Under the first section, you are going to indicate who it is addressed to, the prior written notice. You are going to indicate the date that it's given, the IEP meeting date, and the meeting time. Then you are going to indicate the purpose. So eligibility, reviewing the IEP, revising the IEP, reevaluation, educational placement or change in placement or transition. You obviously can select more than one of these if there were more than one purpose in the meeting. Next, you are going to indicate your explanation of actions proposed. Think of this as just the longest list of notes you can possibly imagine. So I like to give this task to a person who understands EC process in your meeting and feels comfortable completing the prior written notice. So if you are running your meeting, I will sometimes give this task to an LEA, or I will give it to a speech therapist or a psychologist or someone who is comfortable with the PWN process. If you don't have anybody who is comfortable with the PWN process, you are going to have to write this at the end of your meeting yourself. It's just the way that it is. So in the description of actions proposed, this is going to be a list. So for example, if you were doing just an annual review, you might start listing things like discussed student strengths, discussed parent concerns, vision for the future, discussed present levels of academic performance, discussed IEP goals in math, reading, and writing, functional communication. You are just going to list everything that you did. You can say team reviewed the accommodations, made changes to the accommodations. Like this is the list of everything that you did, right? Team considered ESY determination, team, just like I mean, I could list literally everything we just talked about, but everything we just talked about. So you want to list all the things that you did, right? The next section is the explanation. So what I usually do is I make a list on the first section, and then I copy, and I told you I don't usually say this. There's only 2 times you're going to hear me say this. I copy and paste that in here in the second box that says explanation of why. And then for every bullet point, everything that we did, I write an explanation or I write a more detailed description of what that means. So, for example, if one of the things was team reviewed service times for speech therapy and occupational therapy. And then maybe in the explanation, you might say the team reviewed the service times for speech therapy and determined to. All right, so the next section is explanation of actions refused. Typically, what I put in here is no actions were refused at this time. And I go ahead and just write no actions were refused at this time in both of those sections. Um, this just really depends on what's happening in your meeting, right? You might have refusals in your meeting. If there are refusals, like let's say the team decided that it was not appropriate to continue on with occupational therapy at this time for whatever reason, and then this was refused by part of the team. There was a disagreement, and that would be a refusal. It would be anything that would leave you guys with more things to talk about. It could be refused at this time. Or let's say maybe this. Maybe there was a proposal of transportation as a related service, right? Like through a child safety restraint system or a address stop or something like that. And let's say parents refused it. Like we don't want that. We don't want those services. Let's say we proposed speech therapy and they refused it. We don't want him to get those services. We don't want him doing speech. We're doing private speech at home. We don't want to get this to get in the way of his private speech, whatever. Hypotheticals. I don't run into a lot of those. But if you do, that's a refusal. So then you can give an explanation of why the refusal happened. The next section is the source of relevant information where you add or remove existing data. You're going to want to go ahead and add all the data that you used, all the assessments that you used to consider when you were either doing the IEP or the eligibility or whatever it may be. You're going to want to attach those. Additional information, so a description of other options that the IEP team considered and the reason why those were rejected. So you do need a rejection. In all of your IEP meetings, you rejected something, right? So maybe the team was considering if placement was appropriate, considering if the continuum of support was appropriate for the student. You're considering extended content standards in every meeting because you're going to fill out that alternate assessment worksheet. And maybe you considered a less restrictive environment and you rejected the idea of a less restrictive environment because it would not meet the needs of the student at this time. Or you considered a decrease in speech services, but rejected the idea of a decrease in services because it would not meet the student's needs at this time. And then I usually just say in here all relevant factors were considered unless they weren't, and in which case you would want to put a description of other factors that are relevant to the agency's proposal or refusal at this time. You want to put the date that the decision will be implemented on. So If you're starting the IEP 3 days from the meeting, that's the date you're going to put in there. You're going to put who is going to be delivering the prior written notice. That's usually whoever's writing it. Or if it's the teacher who's printing it and sending it home, it's the teacher. And then you're just going to want to put all your team members in attendance. All right, that was a lot of information. We talked about creating invitations. We talked about the whole annual review. We talked about reevaluations, and we talked about eligibility determination and the prior written notice. Literally cover to cover the things that you're going to be doing in ECATS for EC process. And now we're going to do an activity. It's a choose your own adventure activity. It's called the Terrifying Transfer, and it's all about an out-of-state transfer. So join me on this spooky journey. Lacey is a third grader who qualified for special education and related services under the category of AU when she was a student in Ohio. Recently, Lacey moved to North Carolina. She has a current IEP, and the school-based team has completed the comparable service plan based on the provided IEP from Ohio. What should they do next? Should they create an IEP for Lacey using information from the Ohio IEP? Or should they open Lacey up for a reevaluation/initial? I know the right answer. I know the right answer, but let's like pretend I don't. Let's just click on the wrong answer. All right. So when a student transfers from another state, we must move forward with an initial meeting. The CSP is based off their previous IEP, but we need to determine eligibility in North Carolina through formal evaluations. The team met to open Lacey for reevaluation. Should the team request formal observations or just do a review of existing data from the evaluations that qualified her for special education related services in Ohio? So, what do you think? Should they just do a review of existing data, or should the team request formal observations to qualify her for special education related services in North Carolina? The team needs to determine eligibility in North Carolina through formal evaluations. We cannot use evaluations from a different state to make this determination. Since Lacey qualified for special education and related services in Ohio, the team should request formal evaluations to determine that category. How should the team determine which evaluations to ask for? Should the team review the choices and pick the ones they believe the student needs based on their experience? Or should the team use the CMS eligibility checklist for AU to be sure they are requesting all the needed evaluations in order to make the appropriate determination? Each qualifying category has a required set of formal evaluations that need to be done in order to determine eligibility, and there is a link to that checklist. The team has reviewed the CMS eligibility checklist for AU and has requested the formal observations needed to make a NC eligibility determination. They have finalized the reevaluation document and they are ready to get started. What do they do next? Do they finalize the consent for evaluation and have the document signed by the parents before starting formal evaluations? Or do they get started on the evaluations ASAP? The reevaluation document serves as consent to start testing. You need to get to consent for evaluations signed by the parent or guardian before starting evaluations. The consent for evaluations was signed and returned by the parent. The case manager has uploaded the signed consent to ECATS. What should they do next? Should they send an email to all of the evaluators and service providers letting them know they are cleared to start testing? Or should they contact the people responsible for hearing and vision screening first because those need to be completed before other formal evaluations? We should not proceed with any formal evaluations until the student has passed their hearing and vision screenings. Lacey has passed her hearing and vision screenings. The case manager has contacted the service providers so they can begin their evaluations. Almost all the evaluations are completed, but they are still missing APE. What should they do next? Should they schedule the eligibility meeting and the meeting can be held without APE evaluations because it wasn't required for AU? Or should they contact the person responsible for the APE evaluation? If the team requested APE, it must be done. If you request an evaluation on the consent for evaluation, the team cannot determine eligibility until the evaluations are complete. So whatever you request, you have to get it done before you meet. All of the evaluations are complete and the case manager has scheduled the meeting. What should the case manager do next? Should they make sure the required members are notified and available for the meeting? Only the required members need to be notified, or should they notify the whole IEP team, including evaluators, since providers and service providers through calendar invitations? Although evaluators and service providers are not required members, it is important that they are notified so they can attend the meeting and review their findings. It's the second one. You want to let everybody know, all the team members, so that they can participate, attend, and review their findings. The team has finished the eligibility determination meeting, and they have determined that Lacey qualifies for special education and related services in North Carolina under the qualifying category of AU. What should the case manager do next? Should she pat herself on the back? She's completed the EC process and she can return to her regular duties. Or should she complete an IEP after eligibility determination? An IEP must always be created in the same meeting. Do not forget to always complete an IEP after you determine eligibility. The team has completed the IEP and finalized the prior written notice. What should they do next? Nothing. There couldn't possibly be any more steps in this process. Or create and finalize the consent for services. Since Lacey is an out of state transfer, she needs a new consent for services to be documented. A student who is receiving services for the first time in North Carolina needs a new consent for services. The end. Thank you so much for participating in this training about compliance. If you have any questions, please reach out to your mentor, your EC chairperson, your compliance facilitator, and then your EPECCT. Thank you so much. To increase the service time to 30 minutes twice per week, 4 times the reporting period. I don't know, like whatever you decide to do, that's where you're going to put the more information that you have. So maybe you might say in the first box, it might be like team reviewed parent concerns. And then in the next box, you might say, team reviewed parent concerns, and parent indicated that she is very concerned for student safety because he is unable to communicate his wants and needs. She is concerned with toilet training at home